Good evening. Welcome to our monthly agenda setting meeting. Both those attending here with us tonight and those watching remotely, we appreciate your participation and interest in your local government. If you would like to have an agenda to follow along with us, for those of you here tonight, they're to the right of the door on the table just as you exit. And for those watching remotely, you can get one at Athens-Clarke No final action will be taken on items tonight. Items discussed will move to our business meeting, which is November 1st, for consideration and vote. If you have a cell phone or any other electronic device with you tonight, please turn it off or to silent. There will be two opportunities for citizens input. Our consent agenda, which are items 1 through 8, and then new business items, which are 9 through 13. Rules of the Commission allow citizens 3 minutes for comment. There's a timing clock on Ms. Spratlin's desk, which will turn yellow at 2.5 minutes. Please have your remarks finished before it turns red, so there'll be no need to interrupt you. If you brought handouts that you'd like to share with us tonight, please give them to Mr. Berryman. He'll see to it that we get them. We'll have an executive session for attorney-client conference at the end of our agenda meeting. Ms. Spratlin, would you call the roll for that, please?
Dickerson. Here. Sims.
Here.
Link. Wright. Here. Bailey.
Present.
Neesmith. Bell. Here. Harrod.
Present.
Gertz.
Here.
And Hamby.
Here.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to enter into executive session?
Move into executive session for legal pending litigation.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Do I have a motion for adjournment?
Move to adjourn to go into our agenda setting session.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. We'll now start our actual agenda setting meeting, and we begin by public input on our consent agenda, which again are items 1 through 8. So anyone who would like to speak to one of those, come and give us your name and address, which item you're speaking to, and please remember our 3-minute rule.
Tyler Dewey, 1075 West Broad Street, and I'm only going to speak about item 8, although we support, I believe Bike Athens supports all of the transportation-related items on the agenda. And I just want to say, overall, we are really, really pleased to see for the second year that there's a big pot of money going to pedestrian and bike safety improvements. I know I was just out on Millage to see the construction of the median islands that are on Millage, were that from last year's pot of money, and those look fantastic, and we posted a picture on it on our Facebook page, and it just got wildly enthusiastic responses for people excited to see those on Millage and hopefully to see it in their neighborhoods as well, which I think these types of monetary allocations really help provide, and I hope we can continue this in the future, in future budgetary years. My only comment is a small one, and it's about the overhead flashing RFBs, and I just wonder if that might be money, since we already have RFBs at the crosswalk near Newton Street. I just wonder if the amount of money it would take to put those over this street as well would be better allocated to a different project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dewey. Anyone else wish to speak to one of those items, 1 through 8?
Good evening. John Huey, 630 Jefferson River Road. Speaking also to item number 8. Madam Mayor and Commissioners, I have followed the sidewalk issues for years as a longtime member of Bike Athens, which, as you know, advocates for pedestrian safety as well as bicyclists. And I live in an area where we often see people walking along roads with no sidewalks, such as Jefferson River Road, where they must choose between walking along the pavement or walking in the ditch. Saw 2 people walking along the shoulder of Vincent Drive very dangerously on the way over. I was very gratified in 1996 when Athens-Clarke started funding and building new sidewalks, but then I was disappointed in how the sidewalks were being chosen, so often being built on streets where it was easiest to build them, but often these were streets that already had one sidewalk on one side. On the other hand, I believe the first project proposed under the sidewalk improvement plan was along Magnolia Drive, a busy cut-through street and not a bad candidate for a sidewalk, but no sidewalk was ever built there because some homeowners on the street did not want to lose a few feet of their front yards. I fear this is going to be a problem. I can understand the homeowner not wishing to lose 6 feet or 4 feet or any feet of their front yard, but a sidewalk along Jefferson River Road or Lexington Road or Atlanta Highway or any other through street that needs a sidewalk is not built only to serve the homeowners or businesses along that street, but to serve the far larger number of homeowners and other residents, both present and future, living on adjacent streets who need to travel along those streets and may not have an alternative to walking. Of course, local government should avoid the use of eminent domain wherever possible. And even if additional right-of-way is not required, some property owners may oppose a new sidewalk on what they think is their yard, but is actually public right-of-way. However, as traffic engineer Steve Decker has said, the easy sidewalks to build have already been built. I hope you as commissioners will look around your districts to see where you think sidewalks are needed. I don't believe it is really necessary to have a supposedly objective point system, although the current revision does consider safety data. But sidewalks should be built not because they're easy to build, they should be built where they are needed. And those sidewalks that are needed will require the staunch support of this commission to get built, both in terms of dollars and your political support.
Thank you, Mr. Huey. Anyone else wish to speak? Okay, see none, we'll come behind the rail. Is there any commissioner who would like to take something off the consent agenda? Mr. Gertz.
Madam Mayor, numbers 1 for some just brief discussion, and number 8 for talk of some additional options.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Well, this is the time that we would have public comment now on the new items on our agenda, which are items 9 through 13. Again, give us your name, address, and which item you're speaking to. Remember, 3 minutes.
Hello, Uma Nagendra, 305 Willow Run. I'm speaking about item 9. And so this is about hoping to expand the current ordinance to include an Athens Civil Rights Commission. I understand that there have been some concerns floating around about the feasibility and different things, and I'd just like to briefly ease some of those concerns. One of those is the idea that the state may respond with some preemptive legislation to say, no, we can't have any civil rights commissions in the whole state of Georgia. And at first, I'd just like to say that the fear of opposition should not prevent us from making progress, especially in this case as it is unfounded fear. Georgia State had the opportunity to, if they wanted to do preemptive legislation, they would have done so in 2003 when Atlanta created its human rights committee, and they didn't have any need to do that then. Georgia has also been pretty good at looking at surrounding states and noticing how disastrous and disruptive some of the preemptive legislation that their fellow conservative states has wreaked havoc in some of their states. So I think we can look to that to see that Georgia's legislatures are being pretty savvy with not causing further damage to their own state, especially since many Athens for Everyone members have already spoken to Republican and Democratic legislators in the state, and they don't really see any problem. So if Georgia legislators don't see a problem, I don't see why we should either. The second issue or concern has been the idea of giving legislative or legal authority to amateurs. And I just want to be clear that when asking for a civil rights committee, we're not asking for any legal authority. There's a lot that can be done for making a lot of good in this community without needing legal authority. Not every conflict needs to be resolved with fines and penalties and fees. In fact, we're hoping that this Civil Rights Commission can do a lot of good through education, engagement, and research by engaging with communities that are affected to resolve conflict without educating people about the issues and keeping tabs, keeping records on what's going on. And the last issue has been the need to supposedly build it overnight, which is not necessary. We are, if we want to do it, we're going to do it right, follow the appropriate procedures and avenues, and we are in support of Commissioner Gertz's suggestion that the Government Operations Committee be assigned the task of researching, developing, and establishing this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else wish to speak?
Hi, Madam Mayor. My name is Michael Smith. I live at 147 First Street. I'm here to talk about the revisions to the alcohol licensing ordinance. I support. I've read the ordinance a couple times, and I support it. Have a couple questions. As I mentioned last time, I believe it's a solution to the problems happening in the immediate downtown area and that we all know is happening all over Athens in various sectors, not including the bars. But it's a good way to make a strong statement and lead to the second thing, which I support, is a Human Rights Commission or a Human Relations Committee. I definitely, I read Commissioner Gertz's op-ed in the Athens Banner-Herald, and it's nice to see that he was talking about groups that can move on their feet with the issues of the day and the time. He used examples from across the country. I'm totally opposed to a human relations committee like the one in Atlanta. Athens is a little over 100,000 people. Atlanta in the immediate area has a million plus easily. An ordinance like that that addresses concerns among various sectors and our classes of people, and then the immediate solution is to take them to court, has turned out for the Atlanta committee to be more of a play toy for the rich and the political donor class, where they take their issues and push the issues, and then Washington, D.C. and Atlanta-based fundraising group is right behind them. So I think that we should start a uniquely Athens Human Rights Committee, and I think by now everybody realizes we can't do it in this specific ordinance unless we want to always limit it to alcohol licensing. So those are my comments for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Good evening. Walter Swanson, 200 Springtree Road in Athens, Georgia. Also a member and a officer of the NAACP. Just like to encourage you to have the ordinance that would include a citizens committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. Anyone else? Okay, we'll come behind the rail. Oh, yes.
Tommy Valentine, 370 Cleveland Avenue, Athens, Georgia, 30601. I come before you today with reservations, not about being here, but I took a very difficult midterm earlier today, and when I was done, I stopped by and saw the Chesson community event at Little Italy, and what I really wanted to do was just go and have a celebratory drink that this huge midterm was over. Instead, I'm here taking up valuable time. But the reason why I did come here tonight, and the reason why I did want to talk to you, is because I just had a few apologies. The first is this. Last week, or not last week, but at our last session, when we had the wonderful show of force, this wonderful engagement from all of these young people. I've never seen so many people of color and young people crowding these halls. In our enthusiasm, I could tell, as someone who knows so many of you, sitting in the audience, that some of you felt pressured or offended. And I want to apologize for any undue adverse pressure. I want to apologize for any perceived rudeness, for the timing of everything, when we got here, when doors were opened, how things were able to proceed. Because certainly, I think I can speak for almost everyone I know advocating for this, we're not fighting for the right to disrespect anyone. We're not fighting for the right to belittle hardworking commissioners that work diligently at jobs, as I've said before, that aren't glamorous and aren't high paying. But what we are here for is something that's very important, and that is the fight to make sure that our children one day don't have to learn the same coping mechanisms to get around racism that I know I had to learn and other people that grew up in this city had to learn. And you have the power to change that. So that's where my other apologies come in. You know, I'm a PhD student in public administration and policy, and I've talked to so many of my professors about this issue. I've talked about the concerns about the commission defined option. I've talked about the concerns about the civil rights committees and the legal issues. And I can't find a single professor that understands the reluctance. These are tenured, decades-long professors of public administration and process, and they say very clearly the case studies are there, the work has been produced, the paper's been passed to you. You have the evidence you need to do evidence-based practice and do this. So I'm sorry that I don't have the words. I'm sorry I don't have the clever thing to say tonight that would turn your hearts. I'm sorry I don't know how to say so quickly. And I'm sorry not just to this room, but I'm sorry to everyone that will be discriminated against where it could have been prevented because I don't know how to change your minds.
Thank you, Mr. Valentine. Anyone else? Okay, we're going to come behind the rail, and we will start with item number 1, which Mr. Kurtz wanted to take off the consent.
Mayor, a long line of all-related activities that we've seen behind this rail. And while this is on the consent agenda, and I have every intention of seeing it back there and would be happy to, unless there are objections, this involves at least one significant change, and so I just wanted to make the public aware and wanted to kind of address the content of this recommendation. There was a unanimous recommendation from the LRC, and as you can see, it really involves 2 components and then one caveat that I'll mention in a second. The first component is to strike preschools and kindergartens from the definition of schools when it comes to distance violations. I think the general theme was if you got your 2- and 3-year-olds going into the liquor store, there are probably other problems. So we decided not to include those institutions under the definition of schools broadly. The second one, I hope finds favor behind the rail here because many of us have had the clear displeasure of sitting through some pouring license distance waiver hearings for restaurants. And the LRC, again, unanimously recommended that we eliminate that process and simply let the zoning category that would allow a restaurant also allow a pouring establishment, again, exclusively that was a restaurant. This would not apply to bars, alcohol-only establishments. So I want to make that clear. And just given the annual cycle that our finance department always goes through, we're recommending that these changes be effective January 1st of 2017 to work in that annual cycle. So I just want to kind of make sure that was clear to everybody because that does change something that we've been experiencing for, I guess, the last 6 or 7 years.
Anybody else want to have a discussion or ask Mr. Kurtz anything about that one? Okay. And you also asked that number 8 be
Back on
removed.
consent.
Oh, you,
Back on
back
consent,
on
if
consent,
everybody's
okay.
okay with that.
Okay, that's fine. Number 8.
Number 8, this involves pedestrian and bicycle improvements. I'm going to tab over to that agenda item very quickly here. It's going to take me just a second to get there. I apologize. Okay. So I think as a couple of speakers referenced, we really have been on this multi-year advocacy effort to provide for safer streets, both for pedestrians and cyclists, and really for motorists as well, because motorists don't want to come into conflict with pedestrians and cyclists. It's to their detriment as well. And so this takes care of a great number of those high-risk areas that staff has determined exist throughout the community. In addition to a sort of core set of recommendations, there are some staff-provided alternates, and I want to advocate for inclusion of those alternates, but I also want to advocate for inclusion of some other alternates that I've shared with this body via email, and that staff has provided some information on. There are 4 crosswalks that happen at locations where instead of just a small concrete medium, we really could take up the same real estate with a planted median that would be a more visible place in the center of the road where pedestrians are going to have a refuge, and would be a more aesthetically pleasing place as well. And while this isn't a major impact, it would also have some stormwater benefits. And so just to kind of note those sites and the cost that staff is associated with them, the 1072 Baxter Street area is one where we could have a planted area, and that would be about $15,000. North Avenue between 5th Street and Berlin Street, it's the border of Commissioner Sims' district and mine, is an area where we could have a planted crossing. Again, a cost for that about $15,000. And then 2 on Prince Avenue at Piedmont College and at Pope Street. And both of those would cost about $5,000. They would be slightly narrower refuges. So I want to advocate for inclusion of those components as well, that, again, staff has spent some time researching. I also wanted to mention, in response to some questions I've gotten from members of the public, that there are several state roads that are not included on this set of recommendations. Steve Decker has let us know that the state has a pot of funds for improvement of their roadways, and he's interested in communicating with GDOT about those roadways. So I want to make that point as well. And then the final component involves that Prince Avenue, kind of commonly known as the grit crossing. I'm happy to see it included, but I would like to ask that that be sequenced at the rear or the back end of this set of projects, given that there's currently some analysis from the 100 Prince developer about pedestrian movements there, and some of that analysis may produce an eventual distinct outcome from the one here. So if we just sequence that at the tail end, I think that would give us time to get some more information. So that's kind of everything I had about that item.
Have you identified funding for these additional costs?
My understanding is that it would have to come from contingency. Is that accurate?
Yes, and what Commissioner Gertz is suggesting is really more of an aesthetic improvement. So, and we discussed probably wouldn't be appropriate to take it from the ped safety, but they are certainly doable. And Commissioner Gertz, were you still intending for trees to be a part of that?
I would like for trees at the wider ones, much as we currently have near the library on Baxter Street.
Okay. I do know that, just to share with the group, that we had this conversation with Commissioner Gertz too, that staff had a little concern about the trees and that they could distract from seeing the pedestrians in the middle, and it could also be it's a fixed object if somebody were to run over that too. So those are just, we can certainly work through all that, but those are 2 concerns we want to share.
Okay. Anybody else have any concerns?
I just have a question for clarification. So the things that you were just talking about, Commissioner Gertz, in terms of the planted rather than the concrete, where does that appear on our list of streets here that we have in our document?
So those locations are on the list as just those concrete areas. So that's Baxter, North, and then Prince at Piedmont College and Prince at Pope.
And to help
and so I could give you the numbers of those.
That would be helpful
in the sequence. Yeah. So that is.
While he's looking that up, to help clarify, that staff had already suggested some type of median there to protect. He's talking about lengthening them for aesthetic purposes.
Okay.
So it appears that if you're looking just at the segment list, that's number 5. Let's see. Number 8. I apologize, I don't see Baxter right off. Does anybody spot Baxter?
22, is it 22?
Yes, 22.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that, you know, we had these data collected, and I want to make sure that we go down the list and we're not jumping things ahead of other streets where that money is equally needed.
Right. What's great about what staff's provided is we're taking care of the vast majority of this list, save those state routes that they plan to use some state money for.
Ms. Ryan?
What's the total of your, so we've got
So,
three segments, and they're 15,000 each?
40 grand.
Okay.
That's my question. Is this
Yeah.
an additional 40,000 to what staff is saying?
Nope.
So we're talking 78.5? I mean, am I reading that right?
If you include the staff recommended alternates, which
Are
I would
modified by what-
advocate for, that's correct.
So what you're you're advocating for both the staff alternatives and the ones you're recommending?
That's right.
So
right.
78.5.
Yes, and that all would come from general fund contingency because the 144 taps out those various pools, at least for this year.
Since we're
Ms.
talking
Wright, go
math, now that I've found the alternate list, I apologize for those of you who I've confused with the overhead RRFBs versus the $9,000 one. So the alternate for the grit crosswalk when it's moved, and I guess probably we'll get a new name, but that it's a $21,000 addition to the $9,000. So if we stick with the $9,000 on that one, that would give us $21,000 that could help out in that newer batch that you just brought forward as an idea for sticking with the types that have been listed and the type that we're adding, and give some continuity to the type of beacons that we have flashing, and not go to the more expensive type that's the overhang. So that's on page 42, and the alternates where the one for that specific crosswalk changes to a much more additional $21,000 by changing the type. So maybe we can help out by leaving that with the lesser expensive one.
Right.
And have more
Subtract
money.
that from the 38.5 of staff alternates.
Yeah, and that would help with the additional one. Just a thought.
What about the other commissioners? I mean, we need to leave this off the consent agenda if we're going to change it, so what's thoughts of everybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Just trying to understand, so like item 9, we're skipping 8, and we're skipping 9 and going to 22. Maybe I'm not saying that exactly right, but 9 is in my district and Commissioner Harrod's district. What exactly were we proposing for that? Are we bypassing that in order to give money to another one that's further down the line? I don't understand. This is really confused.
I think I can help clarify, Commissioner. So what Commissioner Gertz is suggesting is not changing any of the recommendations from staff or the order of the money that's being spent. He's talking about augmenting with general fund contingency to increase the aesthetic appeal of several of these installations. It doesn't have anything to do with pedestrian safety, so it's not a zero-sum game with any other projects that are recommended.
Well, I guess the only, and maybe Commissioner Harrod will have something to suggest with this as well, but my only concern is that we actually have safety and aesthetic issues, in our area as well. And I guess I'm just trying to understand how we're determining who gets what. I'm not trying to, I just think, I hope we're keeping in mind that there are other areas that might need some attention. And I don't know, maybe these make more sense. Go back and look at them again, but I just want to make sure we're not overlooking some that are further up on the list in order to take care of some aesthetic issue on another side that may be a safety issue on our side or something. So,
Mr. Gertz, want to
Just to clarify, what I did is I selected all of the projects that involved a raised concrete median. So that's all 4 of those were the only projects that involved a raised concrete median, and try to create a more aesthetically pleasing environment in those areas. As long as we're going to get the concrete saw out and have DPW staff out there, I thought let's get sort of the biggest bang for our buck. And rather than go back in some future funding cycle and tear up these installations and plant them with greenery, let's go ahead and do that right now.
Anybody else have any concerns? I have to tell you, I like the idea of planting medians. I think it's so much more aesthetically pleasing, and that might be a policy we want to do for all of our raised medians, look at them in that line when we start suggesting them, so. Yes,
Well,
ma'am.
and just to follow up, I mean, I think that's exactly what Commissioner Hare and I have talked about, and Commissioner Sims along Lexington Road, but we're sort of in a standstill because of, it's DOT road, there's other considerations, et cetera. So I just, we don't have anything. So, I mean, I'd be happy with one that's flat, that's not raised or not as long or whatever. But those are things I think we just don't want to lose sight of that.
Well, my understanding is that DOT is going to be doing some with their funds. Is that a possibility?
Steve Decker has indicated that there's a fairly large pot of money, and I have to give a lot of credit to that department for interacting very successfully with GDOT, the light sequencing software being a great recent example.
Perhaps we could get something from Steve for our voting meeting to let us know where that project stands with the state. Mr. Harris.
I'd just like to follow up on what Commissioner Dickerson said. I mean, I don't have a problem with making things look aesthetically nice, but I do have a problem with so much of our resources going basically to places inside the loop. There is a whole other part of the county outside the loop, and we need to make sure that those people out there are treated fairly, because at the moment we seem to have a two-class system in this county of those inside the loop and those outside the loop, and I'm tired of it.
Yes, sir. Anybody else have anything to say about this? Well, this one will stay off consent, Jean, go and stay on our discussion. That now takes us to item number 9. Would anybody like to open the discussion on that one? Mr. Harry.
I will. I mean, I think we've talked about this quite a bit, but obviously it came out of the Government Operations Committee. There's not really much to add other than that we were brought evidence of particular practices occurring downtown by the Student Government Association at UGA. We passed a resolution. Our attorney, I think, has come up with a good ordinance that will address the issues that were brought to us.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Gertz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of things. I'm supportive of the ordinance language that's in front of us regarding alcohol serving establishments. It certainly sort of hits the nail on the head of that outcome of the phenomenon of discrimination, and I'm glad that we've done that. I'm glad that we passed the resolution in January, and I'm glad we've moved forward with some specific targeted activity around, again, that outcome. I did want to ask Attorney Berryman, simply because there's been a lot of public discussion about the omission of restaurants. And so could you talk a little bit about the legal framework around the inclusion of exclusively alcohol serving establishments and the omission of restaurants?
Yes, I think the discussion in the GOC had to do with the evidence that was presented that resulted in the resolution and then resulted in the discussions that GOC had. And the evidence, I think almost 100% related to establishments that only served alcohol and were not restaurants. There are a lot of restaurants, a lot more restaurants in the licensed establishments than there are just bars. And so the decision was made just to apply this to the non-restaurant category. Now, the question is that something that can legally be done? And in my opinion, it can. I think the claim would be it's an equal protection violation, why are restaurants being treated differently from bars. But the way the law looks at it is if a government makes a decision to distinguish between two categories of groups, if the distinction is not based upon basically the protected classes, and that would be race, national origin, age, and gender, the only standard that's applied is the rational basis standard. In other words, if there is a rational, reasonable basis for making the decision, it's within the discretion of a government to do that. So the way this shakes out is there is clear evidence of discrimination by one group, and there's virtually no evidence of discrimination by the other. So I think it's a rational basis to apply different regulations to the group that has the evidence.
So if there had been a rash of complaints against those restaurant license holders, we'd be in a different environment than we're in because the complaints were really nearly exclusively within those non-food serving establishments.
That's right.
Okay. And you know, and that's, I mean, simply where we are, and I think it's helpful for the public to understand that. So thank you, Bill. I appreciate it.
Thank you for getting that clarified too, Kelly.
And I did want to continue, I mean, as I have, to advocate for a civil rights body. I mean, it's pretty clear that communities across the country, hundreds of them, have used a mechanism like that. A lot of them in the South and Southeast, Fayetteville, North Carolina, Winston-Salem, Austin, Texas, Columbus, Georgia, Gwinnett County, Clarksville, Tennessee, hundreds of others. And I think it's become a mechanism that's been common with local governments because local government is so close to citizens. And I was saddened certainly by the experiences that many, particularly students and other young folks, have had downtown as they've entered establishments. And I mean, I think I realize, and I think kind of other folks behind the rail realize, having studied social science and history, that kind of activity is an outgrowth of a larger phenomenon. It's part of a broader tapestry of discrimination. And what I think we can do with a volunteer civil rights body is ask questions about how we look at the whole tapestry of challenge that people may experience, that we may not even understand, that we may not even see because our skin isn't of a certain color, or our expression of our sexuality isn't in a certain way, or we haven't given in to the rigors of time, or haven't had the challenges of a disability. But all of those are things that people experience out there, and we need to position ourselves so that when people do have challenges in the community, we can respond to those challenges and we can be as proactive as possible, rather than having to wait for dozens and dozens and dozens of accumulated problems that citizens experience. And so I want to position us as a community in the way that many of these have. I've provided, I think, just about everybody with materials from some of these communities like Nashville and Gwinnett and Austin who've gone down this road. Of all of those cities, Austin, I think, has a particularly just general platform in their Joint Inclusion Commission. And they say that they seek an inclusive community. So when people come to the community for academic reasons, for employment purposes, because of transients, that they feel welcome there. And we want to make this a welcoming community. I certainly know that we do.
Thank you, Mr. Gertz. Anyone else? Ms. Bell.
One of the things I don't understand completely is the processes of licensing that goes on with your bars, restaurants, but there are other businesses that can have a discriminatory factor, but they operate in a whole different mindset of a license. How do we work with that, with these kind of groups that would be working with issues? And this may have to come from an answer from the attorney. The difference in the license.
Well, there is the only licenses that Athens-Clarke County issues are basically taxi cab permits and alcoholic beverage licenses. We have franchises with solid waste, but other businesses in the county are not licensed. They pay a business occupation tax,
right? Yes.
Which a lot of people refer to as a business license,
right.
but it is
yes.
not a regulatory license.
That's what my business operates under.
That's right.
Yes.
And so there's just not a regulatory mechanism for these other types of businesses under the way the law is set up.
Well, and this is where I can't quite wrap my hands around. Excuse me, I've had some sinus and stuff, so I've got all my junk. The difference in how that's handled in what we're dealing with, of what we want to do to resolve issues, but can we do it under the same format is what I'm asking.
No. The way the Georgia Constitution is set up, the home rule provisions, prohibits local governments from regulating private civil matters.
Okay.
And so that's one of the biggest roadblocks I think there would be to having a commission and a Georgia local government that basically would litigate disputes between citizens and, say, a business.
Okay. There just seems to be less factors in being able to control when you have the business versus the license.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Gertz.
Just kind of thinking about the line of thinking that Commissioner Bell was sort of on, I do want to make it clear that I'm not advocating for a quasi-judicial body, nothing like a grand jury, but again, a body that would communicate and gather data about general needs and the kind of things that the government may do, even in terms of infrastructure development, that will make life better.
Anyone else? Okay, we'll move on to item number 10. And I think this probably needs to stay on discussion. Item number 10, which is the speed detection device permit and associated documents. Anyone want to talk about that?
Can it go on consent?
Mr. Kurtz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate it. And this is just a general question because I get a lot of questions about this process. I think people, in any number of segments of the community, Whit Davis Road is mentioned in this agenda, but certainly Mitchell Bridge Road, Timothy Road, Tallahassee Road. You hear about a lot of places where the posted speed limit in some segments seems excessive. And so could management talk a little bit about what that process is of over time ratcheting down a speed limit if we're going to want to go from 40 miles an hour to 35 miles an hour in a segment?
And thank you, Commissioner. And I know the radar permit process doesn't seem very intuitive, but just so to catch everybody up, it's really a two-step process. And the first really involves our Transportation and Public Works, doing a report and submitting that to DOT for their review. And upon their concurrence, then we come to the Mayor and Commission to, approve any changes that we have to our permit. Specifically to your question, Commissioner, and y'all remember we talked about this idea of the 85th percentile. So, what we tend to find is that drivers will modify their behavior really according to road design more than anything. And in order to reduce the speed, what we have to do is do an 85th percentile study, and that speed, whatever that 85th percentile speed is, should be within 3 to 5 miles per hour of the desired lower speed. And if it is not, then DOT would not approve that.
And just to follow up, so what they won't approve is our ability to write tickets, to radar and write tickets. Is that correct? We can actually change the posted speed, but we can't legally pursue a ticket. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
It is possible that you can have a speed limit lower than the radar permit, but I will say that our Transportation and Public Works staff strongly advise against that practice. Not only can it not be enforced by the police department, as I said, national studies have shown that drivers tend to regulate their speed based on those roadway characteristics. A more effective form of traffic calming our staff would offer is radar speed signs and routine speed enforcement according to the permit.
And I mean, just picking up on kind of exactly your point about roadway design, I think that's why a lot of the components that were in our earlier agenda item about pedestrian safety are so significant because they're designed to change driver behavior. There's now a piece of concrete there, and so we want you to slow down as a result.
Yes, sir.
Anybody else? This should be able to go on consent unless somebody objects. Okay, great. Item number 11, revision to erosion, sedimentation, and pollution control ordinance. Anybody want to talk about that one?
No.
Put on consent then?
That'd be great.
I had a sorry.
Yes, Mr.
I had a
Curry.
question. Just let me find it for 1 second. Sorry, I'm scrolling down here. There seemed to be a scrivener's error. Okay, so on the bottom of page 86 of the PDF, where it talks about stop work orders, maybe I'm just misreading this, but if I look at what's been removed and then what's left, it doesn't seem to make much sense to me. So it says a stop work order shall be effective immediately upon issuance and shall apply to all activity on the site, including but not limited to land disturbance activity, construction, architecture, landscape, electric, plumbing, and any other work at the site be in effect until the applicant or other responsible person has taken the remedial measures. Am I misreading that? Is there some language missing or something?
Perhaps. We'll take a look at that.
Okay. I think it just needs some wordsmithing.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, good.
I'm
Anybody
a
else?
professor.
Thank you, Professor. Anyone else? Okay. I think that could be. Okay, we got two options. Okay, let's see what the two options are. I didn't realize we had two.
I'm not seeing that.
Commission adopt only change. No, we've got two. We got Mayor and Commission adopt all revisions, and then number 2 is adopt only the changes required with model ordinance shown in attachment 2.
So, and I can speak to that.
Yes, sir. Please do.
So we are obligated by our permit to update our soil erosion and sedimentation ordinance in concert with what the state requests. And so, no doubt, as you've read through there, you've seen some minor changes on who we report things to or the type of form that we use. Those are state required. The 2 specific local changes are in your facts and issues in your agenda item, and that is some additional reporting, of which the impact is just one more letter from the developer to our staff to let us know what's going on instead of just through the state. And the second was just clarifying what a stop work order is, which is no impact. It's how it's being enforced now.
Okay. I think that's the same questions I asked earlier. So, yeah. Anybody else? Okay, well, I think that can be consent to, unless we've got to decide which one. Option 1.
We better wait and decide.
Let's just hold it, Jean. Leave it on regular.
Leave it on discussion.
Yeah. Okay. Item number 12, Legislative Review Committee report on the Sidewalk Improvement Program. Anybody want to talk about that? Mr. Gertz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I can make a couple of notes about this. The Legislative Review Committee spent really several months asking some questions about our sidewalk improvement and expansion planning throughout the year. One of the kind of major outcomes of that committee work has been the mayor's expansion of what was intended initially as the bike master plan to be the bike and pedestrian master plan. So really kind of we've moved a major chunk of the work kind of into that venue. And just to sort of preview kind of thematically some of what's happening there for folks who haven't been able to either attend those committee meetings or some of the preliminary staff work, some of the goal in terms of pedestrian activity is to really get a better countywide objective view of what pedestrian needs are. As you probably know, the long-term process for getting a sidewalk on the prospective sidewalk project list was that a constituent or a commissioner would pick up the phone or sit down at their computer and let Transportation Public Works know we would like to be on the list. Unfortunately, that meant that people who were kind of out of the loop or not comfortable with public institutions or interacting with us might not have gotten their street on the list. And so part of the goal is to really take that sort of 30,000-foot more objective view of the entire county and the county's needs. The kind of other prong of that that's really significant is what seems to be in the hopper is really to have a buffet of options much broader than maybe the more one-size-fits-all approach that we've had for sidewalk installation. So that's just a kind of preview in very general terms what's coming down the line there. What this provides is, given that we've got several $1 million of SPLOST 2011 funding available to us, an interim solution. So this interim solution is focused on a couple of things. One is filling in gaps in our network. So rather than extending the network into new corridors, you know, what TPW has really seen is that there are sort of these missing teeth in our sidewalk and pedestrian infrastructure, and we should fill those in. So this is the denture approach, if you will. So what they have done with that is pared down the criteria. And so you might remember there were 11 criteria in our most recent iteration of this since about 2006 or 7. This pares it down to 6 criteria. And then it provides a prospective future project list. But this prospective project list isn't something that we're voting to fund tonight. That'll come in a later agenda item. So this basically says, all right, here's the lens that we're looking through to spend the dollars that we've got in the bank, because we know we've got all these, you know, missing teeth again. And what we'll get in a future agenda cycle is a recommendation from TPW on some specific projects to fund with the dollars available from this larger list here. This list encompasses many more dollars than we've got available.
That's right.
Yeah, I wanted to add a couple, some details to the sidewalk program list that's on page 122. And that basically is given an example of how the new scoring criteria, if we vote in favor of that, is looking on this list. So it shows how they've scored. And another thing that is different about this with the what did he call it, the assessment team, going out to each of these areas and assessing them, and the cost per foot of sidewalk is not the same where the other list was, so it wasn't an accurate dollar amount, and that's where we're moving to this criteria, as well as the process is getting to where it's a more accurate reflection. As one of our speakers had said, the easier sidewalks have been done. Some of these are more challenging, but which are more costly on that respect, but some of them are still within the range of what that cost per linear foot was. So again, the criteria is the main thing that we're voting on, and then the sidewalk program location is the sampling that they've picked that they think will fill in the gaps while the master plan it moves forward, and as well as T-SPLOST and criteria that might be coming from that.
And where we have the money to fund
for
it,
the
too.
sidewalk. Yeah.
Anybody else want to talk to this? Every time we talk about the sidewalks, these complicated formulas and all, there's only one person probably that remembers this in the room, and it'd be Mr. Sims and I, that we used to have a sidewalk committee of the Kiwanis Club that made recommendations to the mayor and commission about sidewalks. And what they did is they drove around town, and where they saw people that had been walking on the dirt, there's a dirt path, they'd bring it to us. It worked pretty well, didn't it, Mr. Sims? But just a little bit of fun there tonight. So, y'all want to put that one on consent?
Sure.
Okay, and the last thing we've got is our legislative review, our legislative items for 2017 to the General Assembly. And does anybody have any thoughts on that or any comments? Ms. Wright, you go ahead.
Just because one of the items that we talked about, Mayor, I wanted to share that I had gone to the mayor about what our community could do about portable electronic devices. I think with motor vehicle use as well as on bicycles, and what we could do to sort of tackle this. Pay attention while you're in the car, hands-free. I think it came up before years ago, this hands-free option idea and how to enforce it. I think the affordability of hands-free devices now are much more affordable and more plentiful options for that. The mayor had thought that it would be a more challenging project for us to do at the county level, and that it might be a better thing for us to talk to our state legislatures and see what we could do at the state level to do something that is going to help our safety on the roads in relation to technology and distracted drivers.
And when we were discussing this has gone through the state legislature in the past a number of years ago and was rejected. But I think that all of us have seen some actual deaths occur where they're absolutely attributed to people that are using their electronic devices in the car. So I think it might be a little bit more acceptable to the state legislature to look at the possibility of doing something statewide. And we can always come back and do something within our county if that doesn't happen. But I would hope that we have some statewide support now. And thank you for taking care of that, Ms. Wright. And who?
Go ahead, Andy.
Oh, Andy, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just had a question. Maybe I missed a meeting, but don't we normally talk about this in a work session? Our list of things that we want to bring up to the local legislative delegation, and don't we usually agree on these as a consensus? Because there are several on here that this is the first time I've seen them, and I'm not even sure that I think they're a good idea.
Well, I mean, that's.
I've never seen them.
Well, I think in the past we've actually done it in a work session. I don't see any reason that we have to. Gene sent something out asking commissioners for their ideas, and if there's anything on here you'd like to discuss, I think let's go ahead and do it because we need to make some decisions.
Well, I mean, one of these is about inclusionary zoning. I was under the impression that we could already do that. And
but I'm sorry, which one are you talking about, Andy?
Number B.
Okay.
Letter B. Thank you. Number B. I was under the impression that constitutionally we were prohibited from having some kind of quote-unquote progressive property tax system, And on the issue of property tax freezes, we had discussed this as a commission several years ago in a slightly different context. And my understanding was that the commission had decided, maybe the commission has changed its opinion since then, but the commission had decided that basically having a property tax freeze, all that simply does is it passes the tax burden onto somebody else. And then we had decided that there were a lot of issues that came along with that. And so these two things that have appeared on here, letter B and letter C, got my terminology correct there, just seem to have appeared out of the blue. And I mean, I don't know whether anybody on the commission, other than the person that's recommended them, would even support that. So usually this is why I think we talk about it in a work session and come to some kind of consensus of the list of things that we want to bring in front of our legislative delegation, and then we vote on it. So in terms of process,
Ms. Bell,
I'm not sure that this is what we usually follow.
Mr. Kurtz, were you wanting to speak too?
Yeah, I
We'll go to Mr. Kurtz and back to you, and then Ms. Sharon.
Just very briefly, an item that we had on our set of issues in the past, and Commissioner Neesmith, who's not here tonight, I think emailed us today about this, is the prospect of Medicaid expansion. And while in recent years, the General Assembly seemed cool to that, as the governor, it seemed that as time has moved forward, maybe that iceberg has been slightly dislodged. I mean, that's at least what I seem to be reading in AJC recently. And so just as wind in the sails of that effort, I'd like to continue to advocate for Medicaid expansion in Georgia.
Okay. Ms. Bell, and then Ms. Dickerson.
Ms. Dickerson's already raised her hand also. B is one that, since we're working on the Georgia Initiative for Community Housing, none of this came through any of our discussion. And I would have thought if it was going to come as a recommendation or anything through our government, that it would have come through that committee, through Rob Trevina and the group, and she and I are on that committee. I've not seen it or heard anything about it.
Ms. Dickerson.
Well,
yes,
and that's what I was going to suggest. We actually are meeting next week. I'm trying to remember what day. Next week, we're the GET committee is meeting to talk about the things we talked about at our retreat last month. And I think this is sort of getting the cart before the horse. We haven't had an opportunity. I think it was my understanding that we were going to have an opportunity to present recommendations to this body about how we might move forward to address some of the affordable and workforce housing issues. And that's, personally, I think that's the best way to go. I don't think going to the state legislature and asking them to get involved makes a lot of sense for us at this point, because what we're going to need here is going to be more tailored to meet our needs versus what they might want to do at the state level. So I'd ask for some patience to give us a chance to come back with some recommendations during the budget process to address some of those things.
Okay, Ms. Wright.
I'll be going second. Has anybody else hadn't talked yet?
I think you're okay.
I also wanted to bring up what Commissioner Harrod had said, that we usually have the long list, which I thought we had emailed out to us as a prompt to remember whether we wanted those to be continued, because we do need to repeat some of these requests. But I remember that Senator Cowsert had asked us if everybody was unanimous on these, and there was a time when we talked about when we get to the point of voting on whether we wanted to talk about it, we did it individually instead of like a whole slate. So if we're in a time crunch that we need to go forward with this, I would recommend that we vote them one at a time, if we don't have time to do the work session part of it.
Well, excuse me, Jean, is there any reason that we've got a time crunch on this to get with our legislators?
No, then in the spring, gave them a list of items because they wanted to be earlier. They needed
They want them, yeah.
So these are additional ones. You asked me to see if there's anything else need to be added.
So what's y'all's pleasure? How do you want to deal with it?
And Medicare was on that list for spring.
Yeah.
I would recommend that we vote them one at a time. Because we want to, and we would maybe need a little background on the, I mean, I trust the chief of police. If he wants that to come forward, I wouldn't want to vote against it. But I also don't want my recommendation to go down in a group.
Yeah. So Jean, what we'll do then for our voting meeting is bring back the total list that with these added to it, and we will go down them one at a time and vote what stays on the list.
Okay.
Does that make everybody happy?
Madam Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Do we need to do this at our next meeting? Could we do it in December?
I don't have a
That would give us chance to at
Well,
least.
yeah, well, the reason we were pushing it back is because the legislator asked to have it sooner. And we were trying to figure out when we could have the legislature come in and meet. Gene and I were having a hard time finding a time for them to meet with us too, so. Can you help us, Gene?
There just was not an open date.
Yeah.
And, we had given them the items in the spring, and these were additional items that had not been discussed in the spring. So we can include those in next week to refresh your memory if you'd like, and vote on them again.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to pull this off. We're going to hold it. And what's our next work session, Blaine?
It would be second Tuesday in November.
November 8th.
Yeah, we'll just go over these in our next work session and come back with a list to vote on for the commission. If everybody's
General
comfortable.
Assembly does want them a little bit earlier. Could we have a special called session at agenda setting in November after our work session? I mean, just kind of thinking about all the options.
Yeah, because they do start meeting in January, so.
Well, certainly, we've got the spring list ready to go for them, so we can give them that spring list, and then as we pass whatever comes out of this list, we could say, oh, by the way, here's some more stuff for you, so see if that works.
Okay.
You never know.
But again, I don't see any reason not to have a call meeting after our work session. Go ahead and get whatever we feel is important added to it, so we give them one master list instead of piecemealing out to them, because I really think they object to that too, and I think anything we give them later may get lost in the shuffle. So let's do that. Good idea. Okay. Anything else? Anybody before we close shop? Okay. Okay. We'll ask our guests to leave. We have an executive session.